Learning Unit 1, that is an overview of the curriculum. Welcome back to our class, Foundations of Curriculum Development in the Philippines. So this will be the topic that we're going to discuss. So when you are talking about foundations of curriculum, we're referring to the different bases that were actually developed or crafted so that the Philippine curriculum had been devised or implemented. So there are four bases of our foundations of curriculum development in the Philippines. It's based from the historical foundation, the philosophical foundation, psychological, and the so-called social or sociological foundations. So in the historical foundation, it is stated here that the curriculum before touched on the religion, economic, political, and social influences and events that took place in the country. From the word itself, history, we are actually talking into what could be the kind of education that was implemented before the coming of Spain to the Philippines, or it may be somehow what was practiced, no, before the coming of the different colonial rules, no, or the colonizers in the Philippines. The colonial rules in the Philippines tailored the curriculum to serve colonial goals and objectives. Just like, for example, later we'll be talking about the Spanish occupation and the American occupation and the different countries that colonized the countries or our country. They tried to institute a different system that actually would give them the benefit, being the rulers of our country during that period, pertaining to the goals and objectives of these countries that tried to dominate us during those early times. What could be the nature and system of the Philippine curriculum? So we'll be talking here about the different periods wherein the curriculum that the Philippines had actually underwent. And it can be described during the pre-Spanish, the Spanish period, the American period, the curriculum during the Commonwealth, the Japanese devised curriculum, the curriculum during the Liberation period, the curriculum during the Philippine Republic, the curriculum during the New Society, and the present curriculum. The present curriculum that we are referring to here started from 1986. This was the period of the EDSA People Power Revolution when former President Corazon C. Aquino, or known to us as Cory Aquino, became the first woman president of the country that replaced Ferdinand E. Marcos, who had been the president of the Republic for more than 20 years. So how would we describe then the curriculum during the pre-Spanish period? So when you're talking about the pre-Spanish period, this is the period wherein the Philippines was still enjoying the freedom of exercising what to teach or what to do to the Filipino or to the people. Actually, we were not yet called Filipino during that time. So this was the period wherein the Filipino enjoyed their own ingenuity as local people. So the curriculum during this period or the pre-Spanish curriculum period is informal only or was informal only. So it was done through interaction with other people. So there was no formal structure or setup that there should be a classroom, there should be books that should be used by the teacher to impart or to share knowledge or learnings to his or her students. There was no direct teaching and there was no formal method of instruction. So anything goes under the sun. Whatever the teacher will think or will believe that would help develop, say for example, the skills, the knowledge and abilities of a person will be taught by the teacher. The pre-Spanish curriculum also is unplanned and unsystematic learning. So when you're talking about unplanned and unsystematic, there was no planning engaged or involved. There was no preparation of the lesson plan, for example, that serve as basis in teaching. And when you're talking about unsystematic, there was no certain procedures that needs to be followed. Unlike today, if you are actually engaged in teaching, one teacher has to follow a certain plan. Like in college, you should have the so-called course study or the course outline. Or in the basic education, they should have a lesson plan that would serve as their guide in teaching with the learners. Education was intended also in the pre-Spanish curriculum for survival, meaning to say, you learn or you are being taught so that you'll be able to survive or to face the challenges that one has to encounter as he journey or she journeys with life. Another one is your conformity. When you're talking about conformity, is actually like going with the flow. Whatever the teacher will tell them to do, say for example, accomplishing or completing the different tasks or activities, they have to do it whether they like it or not. And the people during this time was really or were really submissive. They subjected themselves to what their teacher or even the barangay captain during this period, because the pre-Spanish curriculum actually was during the time of the Baranganic stage in the country. And also of inculturation. When you're talking about inculturation, it is actually the process of learning a kind of culture within a particular group. Like for example, in the Philippines, we have different ethnic groups. So the kind of culture of that particular group will be learned and acquired through the process of its interaction, okay, within or with each other or within members of the society or community. Then after that, all this, system or setup of our curriculum had been changed when the Spaniards rather came in. That was in 1521. If you can remember in the Philippine history, okay, you have learned that the Philippines was rediscovered by Ferdinand Magellan in March 17 rather, 1521. So when the Philippines was under the Spanish period, they instituted or actually tried to revise or to implement a kind of curriculum that they believe would help ancient people, because we're not yet Filipinos, no? We're not yet called Filipinos during that time. Okay, to teach the people, no, what they ought to learn. So during this period, the 3 R's were taught, and this refers to reading, writing, and religion. So what would be the goals of the Spanish devised curriculum? Acceptance of Catholicism, and acceptance of a Spanish rule or of the Spanish rule. If you can remember in your readings in Philippine history, one governor, a Spanish governor general, said they came to the Philippines with a sword in one hand and a cross on the other hand. What does that sword symbolized? That symbolized what? Authority or supreme power, that they would like to tell the people that we came here as colonizers. So as colonizers, we want to change the lifestyles or even the activities of the people during the time. And in this aspect, we are talking or referring to the curriculum that must be learned or that must be acquired by the people during the time. Acceptance of Spanish rule, talking about the sword, whether you like it or not, they have to obey or they have to follow the rule of the Spaniards during that time. Okay, then the other one that is being mentioned there is the cross. The cross symbolized what? Christianity. And if you can remember, the Spanish colonization in the Philippines can be grouped into the three G's. God, that actually would pertain or refer to the acceptance of Catholicism or Christianity. Another G for gold, that is to accumulate wealth. Then another G for glory, that is for political prestige. Because during that time, in the period of colonization, the more countries they will be able to colonize, the more that they will become wealthy, and the more that they will become powerful. So there is an equation or a relationship actually of being powerful to the wealth that they are able to acquire. What about schools? How schools were can be described during this period? It was characterized by a parochial or convent schools. However, it was ungraded. So one example of a parochial school is a school that is monitored or regulated or somehow administered by the parochial or the parish priests. So until now, these parochial schools are still existing, no? So like for example, in Cabanatuan City, we have our St. Nicholas of Tolentine Parish. We have a parochial school run by the diocesan or the diocese itself. Or even in other places, if you have noticed, the church or even what kind of religion we are talking or referring to, there is always a school, no, that is being operated or actually supervised by a group of theologians, or shall we say priests or ministers, or how whatever you call it, running the schools. But during the Spanish period, they have this, convent schools. Girls during those times were taught how to be okay, good wives. So convent schools during that time also can be described as either colegios, or talking about a college school, or a college or school, or it can be a beaterio. A beaterio is actually a convent for those who would like to become sisters or pagmamadre. So added characteristic of the school during the Spanish period is ungraded. So there was no leveling. There is no such thing as level 1, 2, 3, and 4, or even up to whatever level. So what could be the materials or reading materials used by the people during the Spanish period? So they're actually more on the cartilla. If you can remember, cartilla is actually a book that was written by Emilio Jacinto, making Emilio Jacinto as the brains of the Katipunan. That serves also as the Bible, no, of the members of Katipunan. And canon. When you're talking about canon, these are actually doctrines or laws of the church. And also the spread of Catholicism or Christianity through the means of catechism. So until now, this is prevalent, no? In even in public schools, they have the so-called catechism activities that are done by catechists. Usually, they are sisters or mga madre, or those people trained to educate people or children with regards to the Catholic doctrine. The method of instruction under the Spanish period was more on dictation and individual memorization. So this can be equated to the so-called traditionalist point of view, or the so-called essentialism, wherein every learner has to master skill, right? To memorize. Okay, facts, master the skill. So this is what we mean of individual memorization. So the teachers during this time were actually very strict, that what they said or told to the learners or students, learners or the students have to follow. Well, anyway, there are good things about individual memorization, because if you memorize a lot of things or a lot of facts, then you can easily express, okay, ideas or opinions pertaining to what things you have what or the things that you have memorized. So the aims of the curriculum during that period or during this time is to teach young boys and girls to serve and love God, discover what is good and proper for one's self, and enable an individual to get along well with society. So try to look at the first curricular aim of the curriculum during that particular period, teaching young boys and girls to serve and love God. This is the very essence of the first goal of Spanish occupation or colonization in the Philippines. The first G, letter G, that is God. And no matter what kind of religion we have or we are actually practicing or professing, we always believe no in the Creator or the presence of a supreme being that may be referred to God. So under this period, because if you have remembered, under progressivism, no, they believe that learners or the individuals really are naturally good. So when you're talking about that every learner is naturally good, so you must be able to actually balance yourself and finding out to make a decision, no? The things that you are supposed to do will do good to you or will make you a better person. Then enabling an individual to get along well with society. This is what we mean of how one will be able to connect himself or herself to the different kinds of people. Talking about socialization or socializing with other people. So that is the very innate or nature of man. We cannot, uh, we cannot allow ourselves to be alone. We need other people to communicate or to talk with, or you have a lot of possibilities that you will be able to exercise your interpersonal skills. During the American period, the curriculum had been revised or somehow they introduced an American devised curriculum with the following characteristics. So public school systems were created and the purpose of which is to train Filipinos after the American way of life or to teach democracy as a way of life. Because if you can remember, in the study also of the different political organizations, democracy started no, in Greece. If you are going to trace what democracy is or to trace the origin of the word democracy, democracy is derived from the, demo, derived from the Greek word demos, which means people, and krasi from the Greek word also krasus, Krassus, which means people. So when you're talking about democracy, it's actually embracing or exercising freedom or liberation. So that democracy can be described as a government of the people, from the people, for the people, and by the people. So the American devised curriculum also was based on the ideals and traditions of America and her hierarchy of values. So when the Americans came to the country, they tried to make people believe, or the Filipinos believe, that they came as liberators, speaking about or talking about, okay, the knight in the shining armor of the Filipinos during that time. So reading materials were about American history, development, discoveries, and people. And this is one very interesting thing that happened under this period. English was used as the medium of instruction, and we should be thankful to the Americans because if we were not taught English then definitely we will not be able to master it this time. Because English is the universal language of all people in the world that actually binds or unites or somehow connects people from all over the world. So, if during the pre-Spanish the curriculum was ungraded, during the American period, there was already a leveling of the kind of curriculum. So when you're talking about primary curriculum, we're referring this to grades 1 to 3. And we have already this kind of body training and mental training, talking about physical activities and the development of the cognitive aspect of the individual. In the intermediate, talking about 4, 5, and 6, subjects or core subjects had been introduced already. And what are these subjects? Arithmetic, geography, science, and English. So talking about these disciplines as core curriculum that actually aimed at developing the cognitive aspects of the learners. Another level, you have the collegiate level that included the teacher's training curriculum appropriate for elementary mentors to replace the Thomasites. Because we learned also that the first teachers of the Filipinos were the Thomasites. Actually, they were soldiers, American soldiers. They were called the Thomasites because when they came here, they tried to, they actually rode on a ship known as Saint Thomas. So when they embarked from that ship and taught the Filipinos about, a lot of things, they were called as Thomasites as the first teachers. So the curriculum was organized as a separate subject, meaning to say there was a distinction from one area to the other area. Like for example, mathematics with science, English with Filipino, ARPAN or Arling Panlipunan with the rest of the different disciplines or courses or subjects. What about during the Commonwealth? Just to give you an idea of what a Commonwealth Commonwealth is actually a transitory period wherein the Philippines was given or Filipinos actually was given 10 years to prepare for self-government, meaning to say the American officials in the government will be replaced after some time that the Filipinos then were ready for managing or administering the political affairs of the country. So how would we describe then the curriculum during this period? Okay, it was a period of expansion and reform in the Philippine curriculum, meaning to say they try to examine and they revisit. Usually or normally, a curriculum shall be within 5 years only, and after 5 years, it has to be revisited, it has to be revised, or it has to be changed to suit or to fit into the needs of the students, serve the people. So courses were added like in farming, trade, business, and domestic science. Domestic science now at present we are referring this to those sciences in the field of veterinary medicine. The curriculum for the training of elementary teachers was expanded and elevated by the Bureau of Education. The DepEd that we have now was known before as the Bureau of Instruction. Later on, it was changed to the Bureau of Education. So it started from the secondary normal schools to the collegiate level. So there was now a leveling up of the kind of learning that a particular individual will be able to experience or would like to experience. So a law was passed during this period talking about Commonwealth Act number 586, known also as the Educational Act of 1940. And this law recognized the elementary school system for the information of everybody. before a particular curriculum can take into place, or it can be or it can operate, it has to receive a government recognition. Meaning to say, if you are recognized already by the government, you can have you can start your operation, or somehow the operation that you are doing is legal or within the mandate of a law. So the collegiate normal schools, 2 years training beyond high school was established or were established in 1939. Then grade 7 was eliminated. So did you see that? During the Commonwealth period, this was also under the time of the Americans. We already have that so-called grade 7. So they really believe that students before entering college should be well trained enough with the basic knowledge, no, and the basic education that is from elementary to high school. Until now, we have the so-called K to 12 curriculum. Then it was actually replaced with the double single session. So there was a shifting of classes. Say for example, students can choose actually either to go to school in the morning or in the afternoon. During the Japanese curriculum, there was also an introduction of the Nippongo. If the Americans introduced to us English as the medium of instruction, during the Spanish curriculum or devised Japanese curriculum, Nippongo was instituted. Nippongo is the national language of the Japanese. If for the Filipinos, our national language is Filipino, but for the Japanese, Nippongo is their language. So what did they do with the use of English as the medium of instruction? It was abolished. Okay? It was abolished as medium of instruction, and at the same time, it was abolished as a subject. Because the Japanese wouldn't like to liberate the people during those times. They want to abolish English, because if you are a good speaker of English, or if you use English, you are Americanized. So meaning to say, the influence of the Americans is still there. So it should be abolished rather, according to the Japanese people. All textbooks were censored and revised. When you're talking about censorship, it has underwent the so-called quality control. So books cannot be just simply distributed to students just for the purpose of distributing. It should be in accordance with, okay, passing the standards, or actually passing with the quality standards. And as mentioned, because English as medium of instruction and as a subject was abolished, definitely they need to revise. They need to revise the textbook, the textbooks that are being used or that are being propagated during that time. So training was done formally through schools with emphasis on vocational, technical, and agriculture. So until this time, in Japan, they tried to devise a curriculum that would really determine the skills and abilities of the learners. Not everybody, not all who graduated from the elementary would go to high school, or not all who graduated high school would go to senior high school, or even to a college or university level. They have to pass a competitive examination. It's actually a battery of tests determining their skills and abilities, so that they are able to really filter, or to actually examine how these people are really capable of pursuing an academic career in their life, or into research, or into other activities that would surely help Japan to recover, no? To recover from the destruction of the Second World War, that was from 1939 to 1945. So curricular content was centered on values rooted for the love of labor. O see, Japanese has the passion for labor. Meaning to say, if you're assigned to a particular job or you're actually given a particular task, what you can do is to really work on it. You know, in Japan, if you're familiar with, women are the ones actually working or planting or supervising the farmlands of the Japanese people. Unlike in the Philippines, actually, it's man's activity. But for the Japanese people, farming should be undertaken by women. So PE was also introduced and together with the singing of the Japanese songs. That's why a lot of people enjoyed also teaching. You know, there's some sort of fun or it's a funny thing if you are actually able to learn a particular song of the Japanese people. So the liberation period, this is the period after the Commonwealth government. I mentioned a while ago that the curriculum or that the Commonwealth government was a transitory period, no, for the Filipinos. Actually, Filipinos were trained for self-government. And if the commission that was tasked to find out if whether the Filipinos were ready for self-government would recommend for the replacement of the American officials in the government, then the Filipinos would actually enjoy this kind of management that's solely or purely Filipinos. That's why, you know, during that time, if I remember it right, it was Cayetano Arellano who happened to be the first Chief Justice, no, of the Philippines during that period, during the liberation period. So there were experiments in the community school idea and the use of vernacular, talking about the local dialect or the mother tongue of the people, taught in the first two grades of the primary schools as the medium of instruction. So look at this, no? When K to 12 was implemented in the Philippines way back in 2015, okay, mother tongue based instruction were actually catered to grades 1, 2, and 3. So 3 levels in the primary. But during this liberation period, they tried to come up with an experiment. If learners will be able to get the best concepts or learn best if they are going to use the vernacular. We're talking about the vernacular. This is the, you know, your mother tongue. If you're a Tagalog, then learning should be taught or teaching should be taught in Tagalog. I myself is a Cebuano. Then the Cebuano should be taught in Cebuano or Ilocano or Bicolano, Pangasinense, or as the case may be. So, schools are increasingly using IMs or the so-called instructional materials that are Philippine-oriented. Unlike during the American period, the Spanish period, all the examples given actually are, you know, Spanish origin or talking about American practices, history, or even development. So what is the aim or what was the aim of education during that period? It actually aims every individual to be nationalist and able to contribute to nation building, talking about national development. The very reason why you are educated or the very reason that you go into school is for everybody or for any one of us or all of you future teachers to be contributing to nation building or for you to contribute to national development. In Tagalog, this is pambansang pag-unlad. So during this period, education was made relevant that pertains to the needs of the changing world or the new society. This was during the time of Marcos, if you can remember it right, in September 21, 1972. Oh, malapit na palang mag-anniversary, you know, ngayon is about how many years? 33 years, not 33, 38 years. Okay, Educational Development Decree of 1972 by Ferdinand Marcos. As I mentioned a while ago, he was the longest reigning president of the Republic that implemented martial law. Okay? Ito yung sinasabi na batas militar. may curfew, mayroong curfew ng araw, mga bata, 6 years old, dapat sa bahay na, matatanda, hanggang alas 10, bawal uminom sa mga tambayan o mga tindahan o pundahan. Kung inom ka, dapat sa bahay lang. Kasi usong-uso ng araw yung mga tinatawag na CPP-NPA or Communist Party of the Philippines or the New People's Army. So under the new society, there were curricular changes in the elementary education. Like for example, the focus were on the 3 R's. So that is reading, writing, and arithmetic. The last R was excluded. That's talking about religion because that was only during the Spanish period that religion was added to replace the arithmetic or the ability to count, talking about numeracy. Okay. There was also integration of values in all learning areas. That's why if you have noticed until now, the teacher from time to time tried to infuse values. A part of the type of curriculum that we mentioned, this would fall under the so-called hidden curriculum. Emphasis was on mastery learning. So you have to master your craft. Like for example, how will you be able to master your craft? Well, anyway, there are different learning theories, no? Like the law of readiness, the law of effect, the law of primacy, the law of intensity, the law of effect, and a lot more. I think there were about 6 types of learning theories. So according to the law of readiness, a child learns best when he is ready really to learn. Talking about his preparation for learning or acquiring learning. Added to that, in the secondary education level, there was increase in time allotment. So if English, for example, was given only 45 minutes, then now it's about 1.5 in the basic education until senior high school. That is to give emphasis with the learning of this skill, because English, as we mentioned now, is the international language that would help us unite or connect to the world. Well, there was an introduction of the YDT or the CAT. The YDT refers to the Youth Development Training, and the CAT for the Citizen Army Training. So these were actually added in the curriculum in the secondary. I for one, was able to encounter this YDT. The YDT actually is similar to our present curriculum now in the National Service Training Program that would fall under CWTS or the Civic Welfare CWTS Training System. Okay? So elective offerings as part of the curriculum were introduced. So talking about elective offerings, we're referring to an added subject. Like in our case, when I was in high school, we have an elective in consumer mathematics, or even trigonometry in 3rd year, because supposedly trigonometry should be taught in the 4th year level. Okay, what were the curricular emphasis in of the curriculum during the new society? One, we have moral values. Why do you think moral values was, emphasized? Okay, we have undergone the so-called military government, no, or the so-called martial law. Martial law was declared 1972 and was lifted only in 1981. So how many years? It's about 9. Supposedly, martial law should only be for a maximum of 180 days. But it reached up to 9 years during the time of Marcos. So a lot of people experience, they are being demoralized, or their morale had been, had been put into the grounds, had been stepped on into the grounds by a lot of this, military who were abusive of their power during the time because they have the guns. Then it has also the proper methods of teaching already. So when you're talking about proper methods of teaching, then definitely the teacher must be able to devise a kind of strategy or approach that can be applied in teaching so that the teacher will be able to efficiently and effectively deliver the lesson. And definitely, learning can also be effectively and efficiently acquired by the learners. Talking about the efficacy of the teachers. Retraining of teachers. Why do teachers need to be retrained? Okay, for example, I graduated in 1987. So how many years hence? If it is 2020 now, so about 33 years. What I learned 33 years ago may not be applicable to the present times. So I need to be retrained, okay, to grow more as a person and for me really to be more okay uh, anong tawag nito, adapted to the new system of instruction at the present. Okay, vocational and technical education also had been emphasized. When you are talking about emphasize or emphasis, the singular is emphasis I. Plural is emphasis, meaning a lot more. Plural of the word emphasis. So vocational and technical education had been introduced. Then bilingualism as well. Well, bilingualism actually is different from Taglish. Bilingualism is the use of, two medium of communication at a time. Say, for example, a combination of English and of Tagalog. Okay, so when you're talking about Taglish is a combination of, in a sentence, a combination of the English and the Tagalog. Like, for example, okay, class, kahapon, I went to the market. You know what happened? I encountered a beggar asking for etc. and etc. Tapos, ano nangyari? Okay, combination of the English and Tagalog. But when you're talking about bilingualism, you're actually using two languages, okay, at a time. Like for example, what I'm doing to you now, I speak to you in English. I try to deliver the lesson in English without no infusion of the Tagalog or of the vernacular. I try to state or to express myself first in English. Then to give emphasis, I used Filipino. Gumamit ako ng Filipino or Tagalog para bigyan ng emphasis or bigyan ko ng mas pagpapahalaga yung konsepto na dapat kong ipaabot or iparating sa inyo. Added to that was the development of national consciousness. In Tagalog, this is what we mean of pambansang kamalayan. We have to be conscious or we have to be aware of what is happening in our country. And that is our right, really, especially so with with the knowledge of how well our president is talking about his health condition or health status. Added to this also cultural values because we are actually recovering and would like to strengthen back the cultural values that were lost. Okay, with the advent of this different colonization from other groups of people, no, in the country, like Spaniards, Americans, and Japanese, and so on and so forth. Okay, the present curriculum we have here, it's strengthened under the program for decentralized educational development program or development like the PRODED for the elementary end. Then for the secondary education, we have the CDEP. So it's similar to K to 12. So a lot of teachers were trained or actually trained into this kind of concept so that all of them will be ready in promoting national development and values education. The NSC was addressed also to civic, intellectual, and character development of the child had been introduced. ARBIC was introduced in the basic education. Formerly, it was basic education curriculum. Now it's revised basic education curriculum or the ARBIC. Then the K to 12 was implemented. When was that? It was in 2015, believing that this curriculum would make the Filipinos globally competitive. We can be at par, or we can be compared to people all over the world. But anyway, there are a lot of things that made the curriculum actually in the Philippines at par with other countries. Because if you're a graduate here in the Philippines, you can usually go to other countries and continue your studies without going back. So, say for example, you're 11. If you happen to go to Asia, then you have this kind of, progress, or you can just continue from 11 to 12, or from grade 12 if you're a graduate of to college.